I might try something weird and do a video of making some bread. I have my sourdough starter that I've been working with, and it's making pretty decent bread, and I just thought people might be interested in how I am doing it. I'm using a recipe from a book called from the Flour Bakery in Boston. She has a country bread recipe that I really like, and I'm actually using the Paul Hollywood sourdough starter, Paul Hollywood of the Great British Bake Off fame. And his sourdough starter actually has grated apple in it, which kind of freaked me out at first, but it's actually turned out really nice. So what you do, I use a scale and I weigh the flour. It's 280 grams of AP flour and 300 of bread flour, so I'll just weigh those out real quick. And then you need 360 grams of water. They say to do it like at body temperature, so if you put your hand in and it doesn't feel hot or cold, then you're right about where you want to be. So I just get more than I think I'm going to need, and then I weigh it to get to 360. This is the part that always takes me like 8 tries to try to actually get 360 grams of water in the thing. Okay, we're gonna call 361 good enough. Alright, so you just pour that in with your flour, and then mix it on low. I just do the very lowest, like the stir setting. So you can sort of see it start to kind of look like a dough, at least in the middle. And it's still kind of pulling the flour in off the edges. Alright, there. So we're going to shut that off for now. So then I just pull it off the dough hook and let it sit in there, and get some plastic wrap, put it over the top. And we just let that sit for 10 minutes for its auto-lyse. It allows the water to hydrate the flour, which makes the mixing process go smoother when you start adding everything else in. Would you like to see my bread starter? It's a little gross. The jar is a little gross, I should say. So this is my starter. So let's see if I can get it close enough that you can see. You can see it's bubbly. So I fed it yesterday morning before I left for work. And so it's had time, it's grown. It's about double the size that it was yesterday, so that's good. That's it's about what I was hoping for. Like normally when I feed it, I do 250 grams of flour and about 175 milliliters of water. I try to get it to like a kind of like a runny, not runny, but a loose dough kind of a texture. And so that gives it enough food to kind of work overnight, the yeast and everything to feed all the bacteria and stuff that's in there to really, this is starting to sound more disgusting the more I talk about it. So, I posted a picture on Instagram of it having exploded out of the container. I came downstairs in the morning and it looked like a glob of it had shot out of the top and then landed face down on the counter with the lid of the container encased in the blob of dough, which was amazing. A really cool little science experiment I accidentally conducted overnight. So I've been really careful not to fully screw on the lid of the jar so that it didn't get too pressurized as it was feeding, and that's made a big difference. We haven't had anywhere near the mess. So we've let our 2 different flours and our water rest now during their auto-lyse stage of the process, and I went ahead and measured out my starter here. It's 340 grams of the bread sponge that we're going to add into this little baby dough here. So there's our sponge in with the rest. I'm trying to get as much of it out of here as I can. Good. All right. 2 teaspoons kosher salt and 1 teaspoon of sugar. So You want to keep your salt on the opposite side of the dough from where your yeast is until you start mixing, because otherwise they react negatively. I think it might kill the yeast. Don't quote me on that. So I try to put it in even like away from where the sponge is sitting, just to be safe. And then this is the sugar, just regular granulated sugar. 1 teaspoon of that. And just a little pinch of yeast. I don't put a lot in. Just like a little sprinkling of that on top of the sponge. Just gives it a little boost, I guess, gets it started. The recipe that I use says you want it to feel like you're pinching an earlobe, which is a pretty accurate textural description of the way it should feel when it's ready. There's a lot of people do what's called a window pane test. I'll try to show you that. I am not good at it. Either I'm doing it wrong or I'm just too clumsy to stretch dough that thin. Who knows? We're just gonna stir it on low while it comes together here. I'm gonna make sure everything gets incorporated. And then I'll just turn it up and let it kind of slap around in the bowl for a second to really make sure things are stirred in. All right, good enough for now. Okay. So we're gonna see if this works. You won't be able to see my face, but you should be able to see what I'm doing here on the counter. So first thing I do, sometimes I flour the surface. It depends kind of on how dry the dough already is. If it's really dry already, then I'm not gonna add extra flour into the process. If it's really wet, then I might flour it a little bit just to get a little bit of flour worked in and try to get the texture right. So let's kind of take a look and see what we're working with here. Yeah, all right. So this actually feels pretty good. I'm kind of happy with that. So I don't think I'm gonna flour the surface. I'm gonna just, I've washed it. And now I'm gonna just dump it on here and I'm gonna start kneading. I will tell you, kneading is not my strength. So if you're looking for proper kneading form, I'm not gonna be a good example of that. But I will show you how I do it and we can go from there. So there's the dough. It's pretty good, looking nice and a little bit wet, which is good. If it's too dry, then it's really hard to knead and I just don't feel like I get the stretchy gluten development that I'm looking for with it. So we'll see how this goes. If it needs a little bit more flour, we'll add a little bit more in. So I'm just kind of like pushing it and pulling it, trying to get it sort of mixed together. I'm gonna start breathing really heavy because I'm super out of shape and this is actual exercise for me. But this is sort of how I do it. I have no idea if it's right. I've been watching a lot of Bake Off on Netflix and this is kind of what I've seen Paul Hollywood doing. He does like a double kind of this thing and then pushes it out. It's like a tube, like that kind of. And to me, that's like, what's the point of the second one? It's really about like how the dough feels for me. I like it to be pretty elastic, and I like it to feel like I don't like there to feel like there's lumps in it. So I'm trying to get it really smooth because right now I can kind of feel. And yeah, there's like a little bit of lumpiness in there. You can feel sections that are harder and sections that are softer. So it just hasn't quite all mixed in together yet. So that's sort of what I'm looking for with it. This is starting to feel good. I'll show you what I was talking about before with the window pane test. Get down on my knees here at the counter. So you kind of pull it like this and you try to see if it gets thin, and yeah, see how mine tore like that? It's not quite ready. So it shouldn't tear quite that easily. So we just keep going a little longer. let's check it one more time, see how we're doing. That's better. Yeah, started to tear there, but that's pretty thin. I'm feeling pretty okay about that. Let me do just a little more. Yeah, this is a really nice feeling dough, and you can kind of feel it's a little sticky, but it has kind of that that kind of resistance that you get when you pinch your earlobe. It's a little soft maybe, but all in all, I think this dough is going to work really well for us today. We should get some nice loaves out of it. So now I'm going to get my bowl and some olive oil. You just pour like a little drizzle, ooh, way too much, or you pour a little bit or a lot into your bowl. You just kind of smear it around, coat all the sides and the bottom. So that's good. And then we just drop this puppy in there. It's a little sticky, but I think it's gonna be fine. We like to just turn it to coat it in the oil in the bowl, which you can't see, of course, but it looks like that in there. Yay! And then I'm gonna put the plastic wrap back on top. I'm not gonna seal it tight like I did with the auto lies. I'm just gonna kind of drape it over the top, and then I am going to put it in my oven, which has a proof setting. Just gonna proof for it says 2 to 3 hours on the recipe. I usually do an hour and then I check it. If it's grown a lot in that amount of time, I usually just go ahead and stop it. You don't want it to get overproofed because then your loaves will flatten and they won't have a nice rise in the oven. So we took a loaf out of the freezer this morning for breakfast that I made another week. And this is a really good example of what happens when you overproof your bread. So this is my sad, flat sourdough from the week where I overproofed the dough. So you can see it didn't get much rise, but it did get massive. They were huge flat loaves. So, you know, trade-off. It tastes fine. It's just not the best in terms of its size and texture. It's got a decent crumb though. You can see it's got some good air bubbles and stuff in there. So I wasn't hugely disappointed in that, but they were not loaves that I was going to take into work and give away to people. So we kept these. That is that for now. We will let this puppy proof. I'll check back in on it in an hour. I'll show you what it looks like then, and we will go from there. Okay, so I think we're ready for our next step with our bread. So I've taken it out of the oven where it was proofing. The dough has risen. It's maybe almost doubled in size, which might actually be a little bit too much of a rise, so time will tell. But we're hoping that it's perfect. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to shape the dough into our loaves. I'm just gonna sprinkle some cornmeal onto the baking sheet. And this not only helps prevent it from sticking, but it also gives it kind of a nice crunch on the bottom of the loaf. All right, so set this over here. And then we're gonna just lightly flour our work surface so that the dough doesn't stick to the counter. Gonna dump it out. You can see it's kind of got little stringy bits because it's got so much air built up inside it, which is kind of great. Feeling good about it. Nice looking dough. I just put it on the part of the counter that doesn't have flour on it, so that's good. All right. Perfect. I'm gonna cut it in half just with a regular chef's knife. You can use like a bench scraper if you have one. I do not. So this is what I use. All right, pull that apart. And then what you're gonna do is just kind of shape the loaf by kind of tucking it underneath and forming it gradually into kind of a ball. So you just keep kind of tucking the edges under and rotating it until it gets kind of nice and tight on the surface and holds its shape a little bit. So that looks pretty good. I'm just going to set this on the pan. You want to leave at least 3 inches of space in between the loaves because they are going to rise some, or spread some, or both. All right, so we'll just do the same thing with this chunk. This one's a little bigger, so I did not divide them evenly. That's all right. So there's that one. So there's my 2 loaves. They look kind of like little domes, about that size. Yeah. From this angle, they look like they're the same size as my head, which is not quite accurate, but so there they are. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to cover them pretty loosely with plastic wrap. What I like to do is kind of rub the plastic wrap into the bowl that it's been proofing in that still has some olive oil in it. That way it shouldn't hopefully stick to the surface of the loaves while they're proofing. Sprinkle of flour just on top. And this really is just to make sure that the plastic won't stick. When you bake your bread, if it's had too much exposure to air while it's been proofing, the surface of the bread will crack as it rises. So you'll get kind of like a tear around the bottom, and that happens to me almost every single time. So I've realized I was using like a damp tea towel over top, and that just wasn't doing it. So I've been trying plastic wrap, and I think that's working a little bit better. One of my loaves last week didn't tear. The other one did, but one of them didn't. So we're gonna try this again with the plastic wrap. Just sort of tucking it in, giving them a little bit of a barrier from letting them dry out. It's not perfect. If I wanted to use a lot more plastic wrap, I could. I just find the whole plastic wrap thing a little bit wasteful, so I don't love it, but it does work better than the tea towel. So they're gonna sit here on the counter anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. What you're looking for isn't really a lot of a rise so much. You want the dough to sort of relax a little bit. It should feel softer, and it should spring back. If you poke it, it should rise back up again. It shouldn't leave a dent in the dough when you poke it, and you should be able to see some air bubbles kind of right under the surface of the dough. So that's kind of what we're looking for. You're not going to see a ton of rise, but I will check back in with you in an hour or so and see how they're doing. So this is a bit of an experiment for me. I haven't done a video like this on my phone before, and I just ran out of storage space. So the video that I shot to show you how I was preparing the loaves to put them in the oven did not work. It's just a black nothing. So I am just going to tell you what I did, basically. So they're in here now. The oven was preheated to 500. I'm sorry you don't get to see what the dough looked like before it went in, so I may have to do another video next week when I bake the bread. But basically it didn't really get any taller. It got a little wider and it relaxed a bit. And you could see some bubbles under the surface. And that was kind of all. I mean, it didn't change a ton. But now it's in here, and it's got a really good rise on it, so I'm feeling good about it. So it's 500 degrees. You can see underneath it, maybe? Yeah. The green pan in there has some water in it. That's to get some steam circulating in the oven, which gives it a nice good crust. And then I've got my baking stone in there too. I don't know if that really makes a difference, but they say it does, so I'm doing it. Typically, these ones are supposed to take 30 to 35 minutes, again, though my oven runs a little bit hot, so I tend to try to do them for about 25. Okay, so the timer just went off on our bread, so I want you to see how they look. They're looking good. They're a nice color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them out of the oven real quick and check the bottom and just make sure that they're baked all the way through. Oh, they look nice. They always come out two completely different shapes, and I don't really know. I don't know why. Let's see. So I'm just going to flip them over. can see they're brown on the bottom, hopefully. Sorry about that, blocking your view. It's brown on the bottom, that's good. Yeah, and when you hit it, it sounds hollow. So I think they're done. We've got 2 loaves. This one's got a weird little bulgy bit on it. Yeah, they're done. Awesome. So those turned out pretty good. I'm fairly happy with that. So there's a little bit of a weirdness you can sort of see on this guy, what I was talking about before, about how sometimes they crack along the side. I think that has to do with letting them dry out a little bit too much when they're during the second proof. They're definitely 2 different shapes, but I'm not gonna get too worried about that. So they will make bread slices. That's all that matters. 2 loaves of bread. So that is sourdough with the bread starter that I made. And I hope you enjoyed this little, I don't know, maybe it's a cooking video. Maybe it's just me rambling into my phone and posting it online. So, awesome. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you like it. Leave comments for me, because if you actually enjoyed watching me bake bread, then I might try a little harder to figure out how to hold a camera while I do this. Oh, you can hear them cracking. I don't know if you could actually hear that. But if you could hear that, that's the nice crunchy crust crackling as it cools. It contracts a little bit and you can hear it make those little crackles. It means it's nice and crusty. So anyway, thanks for watching.